Eminem hated Relapse so much that he remade it in 2024 and nobody talks about it. I always think it's really funny when I'm watching a YouTube video and somebody's using specifically this DJI lapel microphone, but they've attached it to something else so that they can hold it. And I think this is objectively the funniest prop I could attach it to. Wait a sec. How was I gonna start this? I forgot. Oh yeah. The Death of Slim Shady is a Relapse remake. That's it. That's the thesis of this video. Welcome to whatever this is. Ramble? A rant? A rantble? What is up, guys? Media Review Mike here. So the other day I was driving home from work, and it had been one of those days where everything just kind of led you toward the direction of wanting to do something violent to someone in a video game. And so as I was driving, I decided to put on an album of music that I thought would accurately convey how I'm feeling, and so naturally I went with Eminem's Relapse. And as I was driving, I got to probably around Ganja, and I was pretty zoned out. I was just doing my thing. I wasn't paying attention to the lyrics. And then I got struck by this weird epiphany. That being how genius the transition between Must Have Been the Ganja and the Mr. Mathers skit is. See, if you've heard me talk about Relapse before, you'll know that it's an album I've always had very, very mixed feelings on. And I've never really been able to bring myself to say that I truly love Relapse, as much as I would like to. I can appreciate its weirdness. I'm not particularly bothered by the weird accents. So clearly, I fit the archetype of a Relapse fan. But for the longest time, I wasn't. And it was because to me, Relapse was an album about the return of Slim Shady, and I didn't think that it executed its concept well enough. But it's not that, though, Mike. Something that's always somewhat bothered me about Must Be the Ganja is the fact that it doesn't have an outro. There's no transition between the skits. There's no downbeat. There's no fade out. The song just kind of ends abruptly. Dear viewer, you have no idea how embarrassing it is for me to admit that I have listened to this transition hundreds of times, and it wasn't until this drive home that it clicked. It's because he's waking up from a psychosis. That's why it just ends. It's abrupt because he's abruptly waking up. I'm such an idiot. Now, to be clear, I know that the Mr. Mathers skit is obviously about his overdose. That's never been lost on me. But I've always viewed the Mr. Mathers skit as more of an intro to Deja Vu, divorced from the rest of the album. But it isn't, because not only is it the outro to Must Be the Ganja, Mike, but it's also, in my opinion, the most important track in the album, because it answers the question that is presumably on the viewer's mind of, what am I listening to right now? Why is Eminem rapping about his stepfather raping him, and himself raping Siamese twins, and killing and shooting puppies and all this crazy stuff? It's because it's all in his head. The whole album, up until this point, has been a drug-fueled psychosis / hallucination that is only ended because the paramedics arrive. Then of course we get Deja Vu, Beautiful, the Steve Berman skit, and Underground, where he's still rapping like a psycho, but there's no accents, and there's a much more obvious self-awareness to the way he's doing it.
A lot of people ask me what the fuck I've been at the last few years. Tell the critics I'm back and I'm coming to spit it back in abundance.
Which of course he does when he comes back the following year with Recovery, which is the spiritual sequel to Relapse. A Relapse 2, if you will. And Crack a Bottle is also on there, but I don't like talking about Crack a Bottle because it sucks and it doesn't suit my point, so I choose to ignore it. So what we've established is that Relapse is a concept album where Eminem overdoses, has a drug-fueled psychosis / hallucination, gets sober, and then decides to be normal again. Does that remind you of anything, dear viewer? The Death of Slim Shady is a concept album where through the power of AI de-aging black magic, Eminem brings back the Slim Shady of old to basically say, hey guys, I'm bringing the old Shady back, but this is the last time I'm doing it because I'm kind of done with this character, so can you pretty please stop asking me to go back to the old Shady? Because I'm not gonna do it. Well, I am gonna do it, but I'm just gonna do it this one more time. Maybe, probably. I don't know yet. I don't know yet, because I'm modern day Eminem and I don't have a backbone. However, that is merely a surface level interpretation of the Death of Slim Shady. T-DOS is, in fact, also about his drug addiction. Because Slim Shady, in current year, is basically just a walking, talking allegory for Eminem's battle with substance abuse. Both albums begin with the return of Slim Shady. Relapse does this with the Dr. West skit, where essentially he is having a dream about talking to his doctor before they discharge him, and then his doctor becomes an evil demon and forces him to overdose, and then he wakes up and he's like, whoa, what the freak? The death of Slim Shady opens with a very short intro called Renaissance, where we for the first time hear the AI de-aged Slim Shady. The whole song is essentially about Slim Shady coming back from the dead. We hear his hand come out from the ground and there's lightning, and it's got this very sort of horror movie sound to it. Both of these tracks narratively establish that Slim Shady is back. Then we move on to the first proper songs on the albums, 3 AM and Habits. Both of these songs are about the fallout of Slim Shady's return. They're both drug-fueled binges where he goes around and says a bunch of crazy stuff. Now, I want you to bear in mind, dear viewer, that Eminem is using both albums to deliver the same message, but in different ways. So when on 3 AM, Eminem is rapping about busting all over the wall and drinking his cousin's blood and bathwater, and then on Habits is doing an Eric Cartman impression. This is not because Habits is meant to be a one-to-one parallel with 3 AM. They obviously have very different tones, but they still serve, narratively, the same purpose. As album openers, it's their job to effectively establish what the concept of the album is going to be and the tone that you can expect to hear on the rest of the project. And both of these songs very effectively do this. And I know what you're thinking, Mike Review Media, shouldn't any good album opener do that? So true, viewer, that's a good point. Let's explore that point by taking a little detour to talk about other Eminem album openers, to see how effectively they manage to establish tone and concept. What does Walk on Water establish about the tone and concept of Revival? Well, it's a more serious album for about 2 songs, but it's not really political. There's nothing in there about romance, which, considering this is the album that has River, Heat, Remind Me, Need Me, and tragic endings, I'd say that's a pretty big theme of the album. Walk on Water, also uniquely by Revival standards, is like sonically pleasant to listen to. But hey, Revival bashing is low-hanging fruit. So why don't we look at Premonition off of Music to Be Murdered By? I mean, it's kind of got a horrorcore tone to it, but it's mostly him talking about how he's the best and how his haters are mean, which we just had a whole album of that. You did that last year. It was called Kamikaze. I listened to it. It was good until it wasn't. But at the same time, Music to Be Murdered By isn't really about anything, and therefore Premonition doesn't really have to establish anything, which is more of a criticism of Music to Be Murdered By than it is the song Premonition. But hey, why don't we look at a more conceptual album like Recovery? What does Cold Wind Blow tell us about the album we're about to listen to? Eminem is back, and he's rapping normally again. And while yes, those are 2 large selling points for the album, it doesn't really have anything to say about the more emotionally vulnerable aspects of Recovery, which I would argue is thematically the most prominent aspect of Recovery as a project. Personally, I would have had Session 1 or Going Through Changes be the Recovery album opener, and then have Cold Wind Blows follow it, because I think both of those songs do a better job of establishing tone and theme for Recovery. Bad Guy certainly does. I mean, I can't think of any other song being the album opener to the Marshall Mathers LP 2. Same with The Ringer off of Kamikaze. Why would anyone want to replace Kill You as the opening track on the Mathers LP? That would be stupid, because thematically it fits perfectly as the thesis statement of that album. That's my very long-winded way of saying that not all Eminem album openers are created equal. Some of them try harder to be a thesis statement than others, and some of them don't even try at all. Now let's circle back to 3 AM and Habits. Both of them give you an idea of exactly what you're getting yourself into. I mean, obviously Renaissance is technically the album opener, but I'm not really talking about it in this context because it's so short, and the first half of it is literally just the opening few bars from Antichrist 2005, so it's got literally nothing to do with anything. Although, it does establish that this is going to be a very nostalgic album, that it's going to have a lot of callbacks, it's going to be very self-referential, which I would argue is similar to what Dr. West's skit does. Renaissance and Dr. West are the appetizers, whereas 3 AM and Habits are the main course. Now let's move on to Brand New Dance and Evil, which are both songs that surround Eminem's past. I want to parallel those with My Mum and Insane, which are both also about his past, specifically about his history of drug use and how he got addicted to substances. They're about his trauma, They're about his mother. They're about drowning that pain in drugs and violence. Brand New Dance does the same thing by literally being a song from 2004, which was the peak of Eminem's functional drug use. Similarly, Evil is about how demented he is, in the same way that Insane is. He pays a lot of lip service to his mother on Evil, but he goes on to pay even more on the next song, Lucifer, which is where the next parallel begins. I am jumping forward in the album because this analysis isn't necessarily linear, but we're talking about an album of music here, not a movie, so non-linearity is to be expected. I think the clearest parallel to the combination of the All You Got skit, Lucifer, and Antichrist is the Tonya skit, same song and dance, and maybe, if you want to stretch it a little bit,
Stay Wide Awake.
Both parallels are the peaks of the horrorcore for both albums' respective concepts. Moving on to Houdini and We Made You, I think the parallel here is pretty obvious. Both songs are essentially just putting up a big neon sign that says Slim Shady is back. As a matter of fact, Houdini is the first time since We Made You that Eminem has done one of these sort of Slim Shady lead single type songs. I think the closest he's gotten to it since then was like maybe Berserk, but I don't really count that one. And in my opinion, Houdini is the only song that comes close to even touching that original run of My Name Is, The Real Slim Shady, and Without Me. Tonally, sonically, and textually, they don't really serve much of a purpose, but they don't need to. Now, you may have noticed that I have in fact skipped a few songs, namely Fuel and Road Rage off of The Death of Slim Shady, and Old Time's Sake, Medicine Ball, Hello, and Must Be the Ganja from Relapse. These are all songs that I would consider filler. Not in a derogatory sense, but in the sense that they don't really move the plot or the concept forward. Sure, those Relapse songs are horrorcore, but they don't really add much. Like, you could take them away and the story of Relapse would still work. The only real link that I can kind of think of is Medicine Ball and Brand New Dance, both largely being about Christopher Reeves. And the reason that I would consider Road Rage and Fuel the only real filler moments in the concept of The Death of Slim Shady is because the concept of The Death of Slim Shady just kind of abruptly ends after 30 minutes, and then the album goes on to just do whatever Eminem feels like doing. Therefore, it stands to reason that the concept/dream portion of the album is a lot more tight than Relapse's, because it, by necessity, has less of a track listing to fill. Then to cap things off, we get the Breaking News skit/Guilty Conscience 2, paralleling Mr. Mathers, Deja Vu, and Underground. Specifically in the way in which it's about Eminem overcoming his struggles, completing the hero's journey, and ending the album. Or in the Death of Slim Shady's case, me turning the album off because the rest of it is really boring. If we are going to briefly talk about the post-Guilty Conscience 2 portion of The Death of Slim Shady, I do think the clearest parallel would be Beautiful being a parallel to Somebody Save Me, or maybe Temporary, but I think Somebody Save Me fits better. You could also argue that Head Honcho, Bad One, and Toby kind of parallel with Crack a Bottle in the sense that they add absolutely nothing to their respective projects, and were all also probably for other people's projects. And then obviously the Ken Kniff outro in Relapse parallels the Guess Who's Back skit. I don't think I need to explain that one. Now I know what you're thinking, Mike. Are you a Bungie title from 2010 because you're Halo reaching? And I think, to an extent, you're a stupid idiot who's not listening to what I'm saying. I mean, can you honestly look me in the eye and tell me that this theory is worse than reverse theory, which I would like to remind everybody, one, of reverse theory, and two, that reverse theory was seriously considered by a lot of people to be the intended way of listening to The Death of Slim Shady when it dropped. People were making whole videos about it. Literally no one talks about it anymore because people all collectively realized, oh, this is really stupid. So I don't want anyone in the comments who even remotely entertained reverse theory for more than 2 seconds to complain about this theory. Look, I'm not saying that Eminem sat down and copied his own homework beat for beat when making The Death of Slim Shady, obviously. The Death of Slim Shady tracklist is not a beat for beat remake of Relapse. That is not what I'm claiming. Rather, I consider it a remake in the sense that Edgar Wright's Running Man could theoretically be seen as a remake of the Arnold Schwarzenegger film. It's not really a remake as much as it's drawing from the same source material, but presenting it differently. Eminem looked at his overdose and returned to the public eye in 2009 and created a concept horrorcore record about a literal drug relapse, but also a metaphorical relapsing into stardom. Then he would take those same feelings and recontextualize them 15 years later through the lens of a meta-commentary about fan expectations versus what he wants to do with his self-expression personally and artistically. They're the same idea, but with different presentations. The same room, but with a different coat of paint. I already know what the comments are gonna say. They're gonna say, first, your hair looks weird. I thought you shaved it 4 months ago. Relapse is the best Eminem album. You've gained weight. View my profile for sexy bikini pics, sex with MILFs in your area. Go to link www.barenakedladies.com. Where is the Sodaland review? And of course, where does Relapse 2 fit into this? It doesn't. Relapse 2 doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense as a project. Why do you think he scrapped it? Like, yes, it was because of the accents, but why do you think that he completely shifted the trajectory of the album's direction instead of just remaking all of the Relapse 2 songs but without accents? It's because he was done with the Relapse concept. Recovery is Relapse 2. Just because it isn't called Relapse 2 doesn't mean that's not narratively what it is. I'm so sick of people talking about Relapse 2 like it's meaningfully part of Eminem's discography. And look, I'm guilty of this. I included Relapse 2 in my Eminem ranking and review series, but that's only because no one else has done that, and I wanted to do my video a little bit differently. But it's not meaningfully part of his discography. Like, I remember seeing this guy's post, I don't remember how long ago it was, but it was on the M-Ball Discord, and he had put forward this proposed remake of the Revival track list, where he had bafflingly included syllables off of the King Mathers era, and everyone was flaming him, right? And like, fair enough, it was a pretty bad compilation. But it just made me think to myself, this guy's Revival remake is no technically more or less wrong than anyone else's. Like, yeah, including a 2007 era leak in a Revival track list is a little bit silly, but I thought about it for a bit and I kind of see the vision. Like, Eminem is always returning to his vault, and with some overhauling, I can see a song like Syllables working as it kind of ties into that 2017, 2018 era of hating on mumble rap. Now, was the poster thinking that too, or do I just spend way too much time thinking about Eminem? I don't know. But my point in regaling that story to you all is to say that when discussing fan work, no one person's idea is more or less correct than another person's. Hey viewer, guess what? Your Relapse 2 compilation is 100% incorrect, and so is mine. We don't have every song that Eminem made during those Relapse 2 recording sessions. We certainly don't have the confirmed opening track, which was Insult to Injury, and most Relapse 2 fan albums use fan-made skits, which definitely wouldn't have been on the album. It is decidedly not what Relapse 2 would have been. It might be very close, but unless Eminem decides to release Relapse 2, which I don't think will happen unless it's posthumously, we won't ever know what Relapse 2 was gonna sound like. So the next time you feel like bashing a guy to death with hammers because he put a 2007 King Mathers era song on his Revival compilation, maybe just take a minute to step back and think about the fact that you are a person who spends a not insignificant amount of their free time retooling decades-old musical albums because you don't think they're as good as they could be. Can we all just unanimously agree that that's kind of weird? And hey, I'm not casting stones. I do it too. I just don't think that we should be passing judgment on people who share the same weird niche hobby as we do. I didn't have much of a plan for this video. I just kind of wrote down a bunch of thoughts onto a Google Doc. I just wanted to talk about this funny little parallel that I noticed, and I wanted to see how far I could stretch it. And then I started ranting about how annoying Eminem fans are. So it's pretty much just regular Hashem the hours, isn't it? I'm not anticipating as much disagreement with this theory because I think Eminem fans are, how do I put this nicely? Very easy to excite when it comes to fan theories. I wouldn't even really call what I've talked about here a theory. It's just kind of a neat observation. But I hope somebody out there finds it as interesting as I do. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the Sodaland review, which will hopefully be releasing in 2 to 3 weeks' time. This is Media Review Mike, signing out.